have some incredible people that work with me on things, and they came up with this. That's the real deal. That's the real deal.
Former President Donald Trump is selling shoes in his first return back to the campaign trail after being slapped with an estimated $350 million fine. The former president went to a sneakerhead haven in Philadelphia over the weekend to debut the $400 kicks that are gold with an American flag imprint and red bottoms. They're called the Never Surrender high top. So I guess the red MAGA hat is 2016 and dated now. Joining me now is my friend and colleague, the legendary Miss Julia Manchester, host of the great show on the Hill TV, What America is Thinking, or What's America Thinking. So, Julia, why is Trump selling his soul, his shoe sole, that is?
You know, Kevin, we've seen Trump do this in the past. He's tried to profit off of his likeness, his brand, really for decades. And last year we saw him release or announce that he was going to be selling NFT trading cards. So I don't think this is anything particularly new. However, I thought it was an interesting venue for Trump to unveil these shoes. I mean, if you really listen to that audio, you hear cheers, but you also hear some boos. It wasn't a 100% pro-Trump crowd. And, you know, you heard Trump talk about, you know, maybe we could appeal to some younger consumers, maybe younger voters. But, you know, that could possibly be the case, especially with young male voters, maybe. However, we know that the Trump brand has become incredibly political, incredibly divisive. So I'm curious to see how this shoe brand does going forward. But they say they've sold out so far.
Well, his sons, his business associates, they were whacked with a $350 million fine, and Trump is barred from doing business now in New York for at least 3 years. Trump says he's going to appeal, but financially, I mean, these court cases are really starting to take a hit.
They are. And if you listen to Trump rail against the judge, rail against these court cases, you can really tell that he's having a visceral reaction, that he is really frustrated with this because, you know, obviously he's trying to run for president of the United States. It's a very expensive undertaking, and he won't be able to tap into his personal fortune like he has in the past to cover this, cover his presidential run if he has all of these legal fees piling up. Remember, it's not just what he's ordered to pay, but he's paying attorneys. He's, you know, paying for travel to go to some of these locations. So it's going to be difficult for Trump to really balance this going into the general election.
You know, it's not just the shoes that Trump is selling. They're called the high tops, by the way. There's athletic sneakers. There's cologne. What do you think the Trump cologne smells like, Julia Manchester?
Oh my gosh, I don't even know what it smells like. Hopefully it doesn't smell like Axe. Hopefully it's a bit, you know, more sophisticated than that.
Well, we actually have the description it's tucked in here. And for $99, you can smell like the cologne, and it's got cedar in it. It's also got some scents. It's called Victory, by the way, and it's got a crisp opening of citrus blends, and it's underpinned, according to the description, by a rich base of leather and amber. But you got to wait until June 2024 to get that cologne. You think Biden's going to come out with a cologne, Julia?
I don't think so. I don't think that's in the cards for Biden. But, you know, the description of Trump's colognes sounds very masculine, really putting that energy out there.
All right, meanwhile, Senator J.D. Vance, a Republican from Ohio, a key Republican Senate ally for Trump, he said at the Munich Security Conference over the weekend that Trump would not pull out of NATO. Take a listen.
I can't speak for Donald Trump. I can speak for myself, and I think that he agrees with what I'm going to say. No, I don't think that we should pull out of NATO. And no, I don't think that we should abandon Europe. But yes, I think that we should pivot.
So Vance also reiterated his deep skepticism of the U.S. continuing to fund Ukraine's defense against Russia. Julia, I mean, is Trump going to pull out of NATO or not? There seems to be a lot of conflicting messages.
Yeah, conflicting messages, especially during quite a newsy week when it comes, to Russia and, also NATO and Russia. Trump is sending out very conflicting messages. Obviously, a few weeks ago, he said or appeared to suggest that Russia should attack NATO countries that don't pay their fair share. He's continued to, throw some jabs at NATO countries and saying they need to pay more. And we know his base is very skeptical of international organizations like NATO, and they're skeptical of some of the priorities of NATO, including backing the Ukrainians in their war against Russia. So, we'll have to see. But Trump, that would be an enormous move from Trump. But he's sending out a number of different signals. It's kind of hard to see where he's going with this.
Well, I would ask you this: is it that his base is skeptical of NATO, or that they're skeptical of a lack of transparency in funding Ukraine? Because more than 90% of Americans support NATO. So to attack NATO, an allied organization that's been, decades of global security and global order is a very big political risk. He risks alienating not just the military officials, but also those serving in the military right now as well. And it's interesting because he also got another remarkable showing of support, this time from Senator Lindsey Graham, a Republican from South Carolina. Remember, he used to be one of the three amigos with the late, great Senator John McCain. Graham came out and said that he is opposed to the foreign aid bill, which, of course, would back Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel. Why is Lindsey Graham opposed to this bill? It does not mesh with any of his previous foreign policy positions.
Right. This was a big piece of news when he came out against this legislation. Look, I think you are seeing Lindsey Graham fall in line with Trump and fall in line with the Trump base in terms of, pushing back against funding for Ukraine. Look, the Republican base, for better or for worse, has a quote unquote America first agenda right now. And if it's America first, it doesn't necessarily include Ukraine. I think there's this feeling among a lot of people in this more conservative, I think you could even say isolationist base, that the U.S. is continuing to fund Ukraine, but we're not getting anything in return, and we're not seeing results in the war against Russia. So I think you're seeing Lindsey Graham really start to reflect what the base is saying.
So the U.S. is grappling with funding, and the House is in recess, mind you, until the end of the month. Hundreds of protesters were arrested in Russia for mourning the death of Putin opposition leader Alexei Navalny. So while protesters are getting arrested under Putin's Russia, the U.S. is still holding up aid for Ukraine. I mean, what message is the United States right now collectively projecting, Julia, to the broader international world?
It's a divided message, and I don't think it's a really reassuring message at this point. I think a lot of our allies are looking in, and even our adversaries, looking into the Congress and seeing a Republican Party and a Congress that is divided over this issue of foreign policy and foreign aid. So I think it really concerns, obviously, our allies in NATO and other allies. But, if you're Vladimir Putin and you're looking in on this, and you've seemingly for now have gotten away with eliminating your top political rival ahead of your reelection bid, that he is very much on track to win, whether it's fair or unfair. You're probably feeling optimistic because U.S. lawmakers don't have it together in terms of unifying on this policy.
Well, a British-owned cargo ship was evacuated after the Houthis, a terrorist group, fired a missile at the cargo ship, and the Houthi attacks are not slowing down. So while all of this is going on, you've got the Houthi attacks and the Houthi terrorists continuing to run amok abroad. So what's the White House saying about the latest Houthi attack?
Look, in terms of the latest Houthi attack, you're going to see the White House. You're already seeing them push back against it, talk about the need for a U.S. presence in the region, really hit back against Iran. The White House stance is that the Houthis are obviously backed by Iran. So they're going to continue really hitting back at this and hitting back at the escalation in the region since October 7th. We've seen in the recent weeks, these attacks continue to increase and continue to really concern Americans and our allies in the region. So it's something the White House is very concerned about.
And by the way, Lindsey Graham, after the last attack, when 3 American troops were killed, Lindsey Graham tweeted out, "Bomb Iran." Remember that? And now he's saying that he's against the foreign aid bill. So I really don't understand, Julia, at all the logic behind Senator Lindsey Graham's foreign policy positions. One more thing before I let you go. Did you see this? George Santos, remember that guy? He's suing Jimmy Kimmel. Why? What do we know? How? What? You can't make it up, Jules.
Well, it has to do with the cameo appearances that Jimmy Kimmel has, aired on his show. Look, I think this is George Santos once again trying to get in the headlines and go after, someone who he likes to brand as a left-leaning liberal entertainer. This is George Santos trying to stay relevant, maybe trying to make some money. I haven't looked into the ins and outs of the lawsuit, but, definitely an interesting move from the former congressman.
Never a dull moment. Julia Manchester, the host of The Hill TV's What's America Thinking. Thank you, Julia, as always. Excellent reporting.
Thanks, Kevin.
The Biden administration is reportedly expected to loosen its rules for the country's switch to electric vehicles. The Environmental Protection Agency's change in its proposed rule would implement less stringent requirements for vehicle pollution in the short term, and this would give car manufacturers a smaller percent of their fleet to be required to be electric by 2030. That's under the Biden administration's initial proposal, and the New York Times first reported the news. And are you looking for a job change that's out of this world? NASA is currently seeking applicants for its one-year Mars surface mission to help inform NASA's plans for human exploration of the fourth rock from the sun. The deadline is April 2nd. Now, you won't actually be going to Mars. You will be living in a year-long Mars simulation. Each mission involves 4 people who live and work inside of a 1,700 square foot 3D printed habitat in NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. It's called the Mars Dune Alpha, and it's designed to help NASA experts and scientists prepare for manned missions to Mars. The job simulates resource limitations, equipment failures, communication delays, and you will have to do simulated spacewalks, robotic operations, habitat maintenance, exercise, and crop growth. It's like The Office at Dunder Mifflin meets Star Trek. One of the application questions, I know because I actually went on and looked at the application. It says, how would you deal with not using social media? Are you kidding me, NASA? That sounds like a vacation. Sign me up. I've always said I want to go to space, but I also want to come back down here to Earth. That's it for today's Daily Debrief. My name is Kevin Cirilli. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel unless you're in the Mars mission, in which case you cannot go on social media. Come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.